to create some more content for you. He's talking about some directors he knows. These are the Teenage Film Snob hiatus shows.
Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, your friendly neighborhood film snob. It's another solo show. I'm still on hiatus, and when I'm on hiatus, I'm talking about my favorite directors and ranking their films from least favorite to most favorite. You know the rules by now. There are no films I dislike. These are not filmmakers I dislike. I'm just going through and ranking them to have something to talk about, give you guys something to comment on and see whether you agree or disagree. There's not too many rules here. The main rule is I'm only talking about feature films. I'm not talking about specials. I'm not talking about TV shows. I'm not talking about shorts. And if I've only seen the film once, it will automatically be ranked a little bit lower just because I haven't had a chance to fully appreciate what it is, whereas other films in the list I have watched numerous times. And today is really interesting because this director's films, for the most part, are almost all exclusively IP. They're almost all exclusively franchise films. They're almost all exclusively superhero films. And even the ones that are original are also superhero films. So going to a bit of a different direction. We are talking about a filmmaker who has been controversial at times. Controversial back in 2017, 2018 when some tweets were investigated and brought to light and resulted in him being fired by Disney. Of course, he was rehired by Disney later. And when that happened, Warner Brothers were like, we don't care, we'll look after you, and let him make a DC film. And he's still in controversy today because he is now the current head of DC Studios, which most of us really like, but there is a certain portion of the audience was not happy with the way DC and Warner Brothers handled the closure of that previous universe, and of course are blaming James Gunn. I've been a James Gunn fan for a long, long time, since 2006, I want to say, when I saw his very first film, Slither. It was the film that introduced me to Nathan Fillion. I'd never seen him on anything before and immediately fell in love with him. That had Elizabeth Banks. I'd only ever seen her in 40-Year-Old Virgin. And it also reminded me of the genius that is Michael Rooker. I'd previously seen him in Mallrats. James Gunn has been an essential element of the tapestry of superhero films for the last 20 years. His involvement mostly began in 2014 with Guardians of the Galaxy, but he was making obscure, interesting films long before that as well. But yeah, he's got 7 feature films to his name. He's got a few more coming. He just announced Man of Tomorrow, which he will be releasing in 2027. But most of his films are superhero films. He's got 3 Marvel flicks, he's got 2 DC flicks, and then 2 original ones as well. But I like James Gunn. I've always liked him. When they announced him as the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, I was really excited because I'd seen Super, I had seen Slither. I also knew that he began his journey with Troma. He worked on Romeo and Juliet. He'd done a lot of work with Lloyd Kaufman there. I was also excited because he wrote the Scooby-Doo films, and that first one in particular is very, very good. I also like the second one. The second Scooby-Doo film is incredibly underrated, but that's okay. I also knew that he had previously worked with Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder's first feature film was Dawn of the Dead, and the script for Dawn of the Dead was, of course, written by James Gunn, and that was quite an exciting collaboration as well. So I've been a James Gunn fan for a long, long time, regardless of the controversies, which, by the way, we're not going to address on the podcast today. Everyone who's got an opinion on them has shared that opinion online. You don't need one more straight white guy with a beard and a gut talking about James Gunn's controversies. I'll let you do your own research. That's totally fine. But regardless, the man's a hell of an artist. He's also responsible for the TV show Peacemaker, which is fantastic. He did the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, which is not going to be included in my list because it is technically a short, but that's wonderful. He was also married to Jenna Fisher in the 2000s. Jenna Fisher, who you may know as Pam Beesly from The Office. So he's been around, done some interesting things, been involved with some interesting people for a long, long time. He's got 7 flicks. I'm going to rank them from 7 to 1. I'm going to share my thoughts and feelings. This will probably be, of all the lists, maybe the most divisive, because unlike previous directors, I've spoken about Robert Eggers, I've spoken about Rob Zombie. I've spoken about Eli Roth. Those are three horror movie directors. They're very niche filmmakers. They have a very specific audience, but most of their films don't go into the mainstream. James Gunn is mainstream. He started off independent and in the shadows, but five of the 7 movies he's made are mainstream films, and people have lots of opinions. So I imagine people are going to have lots of opinions on my list as well. I'm going to give it my best go. This was probably the toughest list I've had to put together so far because, as I've said before, the only rule I have is that if I've only seen it once, it has to go lower on the list. And there's a film he released this year that is probably my favourite of his, but given the fact that I haven't rewatched all of his films in a while, and I've only seen it once, I don't think I can put it as high as I would like to. So I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to follow the rules that I've made up and can change any time, but I'm choosing to stick to them. So, starting in with number 7, it's the only film on the list that falls below the first-time viewings. And it's because I'm pretty confident once I rewatch the other 2, they will still sit higher than this one. This is a great flick. I really like it. This is not a matter of bad film versus good film. Just out of all the ones, which do I connect with the most? And this is the one I probably connect with the least. This film is cursed with middle child syndrome. It had to build on the first film that was very, very successful and set up and lead into not only a third film, but also into the culmination of a cinematic universe, which is not an easy thing to do. I think it does a very good job of it, but just for my money and for my enjoyment, it's probably the lowest on the list, but still a wonderful film. I'm talking, of course, about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians 2 sees us return to our group of misfits, Peter Quill, Star-Lord, Nebula, Drax, Groot, Rocket Raccoon. We are introduced, of course, to... I didn't mention Gamora as well. We're introduced to Mantis and Ego the Living Planet. And it's their next adventure. It's been about 6 months since the first film. 3 years in real time for us, but 6 months since the first film. They're more of a family unit now. They're working together, and they're on their next kind of space-bound adventure, as tends to be in these films. The sense of humor is really fun. Visually, it's stunning. I think of the 3 Guardians films, it might be the best looking. The use of color is excellent. There's some really fun planets. There's some really fun characters that really pop. I can't remember the name of the aliens headed by Aisha, but they're all painted gold. And one thing I really love about the Guardians films is that James Gunn resisted the urge to use CGI on a lot of his alien species. Instead, it's prosthetics and body paint, which I think works really, really well for the franchise as a whole. I also think Guardians 2 has the best soundtrack of the 3 films. The first one is a classic, of course, but the second one is full of wonderful deep cuts and really, really fun to listen to. So I don't really have any beef with this film. I don't dislike this film in any way. I just feel of the 3, it's the one I'm the least invested in. The first one I'll talk about later. The third one I'll also talk about later. But this one here, it's just... the first one opens with the death of Meredith Quill, which is such a gut punch. And the third one deals with the death of Rocket's friends and his traumatic origins. This one just has, I guess, less emotional beats. And I know that Ego, spoiler alert, murdered Meredith Quill. He's the one who was responsible for her dying. But I just feel like it's great. It's really good. I love it. It's just, it's just a little bit weaker than the other 2. So even though I've seen Guardians 2 probably half a dozen times, I'm still putting it at the bottom because I know with the 2 I've only seen once, I'm going to rank them higher later. They're still going to probably come out on top with Guardians 2. But if this is the worst film in your filmography, you have a pretty good filmography, to be honest. So moving into 6th place, it's Guardians 3. It's the final chapter in James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. Whether they do more with Guardians of the Galaxy and Peter Quill, I'm not sure. There have been talks about that happening, but if they do, it will be without the assistance of James Gunn. And this film is masterfully done. I've only seen it the one time. It destroyed me in theaters, as it did most. It's a very emotional film. It is one of the few movies to get the nod of approval from Peter, which doesn't really matter. Like, PETA's a very interesting organization, and I'm not here to talk about politics or anything like that. But the portrayal of animal cruelty and how it affects animals and people and stuff, I think, is instrumental to this story. We're introduced to the character Adam Warlock, who was teased 6 years earlier in Guardians 2. You know, we saw in the post-credits that IH had created something called Adam. Adam Warlock in the comics is a very strong character. He wields the Infinity Gauntlet. He has the Soul Stone. So I think a lot of people were expecting him to show up in the Avengers, Infinity War or Endgame. And when that didn't happen, I think people were a little bit confused. But I think introducing him in a Guardians film makes a lot more sense. We want to build up that character, get to know him a little bit more. This one's also very visually interesting. There's that scene where they're jumping out of the spaceship in the coloured suits. There's the planet city that's run by Nathan Fillion, where he plays a guard who looks like a rock monster. We have the planet of anthropomorphic animals. And of course, maybe one of the best villains that Marvel have delivered, the High Evolutionary, played by Chuck Waddy. I can't remember his last name. He was also in Peacemaker. The High Evolutionary is one of the best villains, up there with Loki, up there with Thanos. Maybe the third best villain, although Wilson Fisk is also very good. But for his debut in a 2.5-hour film, he really cemented his place. That character did not die. Spoiler alert. So we could see him come back. I always posited the theory that with the whole Jonathan Majors situation, with the removal of Kang from the timeline, you could have made High Evolutionary a variant of Kang and get this actor to come in and play Kang instead. He's got the chops, he's fantastic, he's menacing, he's wonderful. The only reason Guardians 3 is not higher is I've only seen it once. I can't bring myself to watch it again just yet. It's a real emotional gut punch. I'm going to rewatch all the Marvel films in 2026 in the lead up to Doomsday, of course. But yeah, I haven't gone back to Guardians 3 yet, but it's spectacular. It's a really fitting end. The post-credit sequence is fun. We get Flying Groot. I remember when I saw Guardians 3 in theaters, James Gunn had already been announced as president of DC Studios, and he'd kind of announced what his lineup was going to be, and included in that lineup was Swamp Thing. When I saw Groot flying out of a spaceship, I got very excited for Swamp Thing, because if you're a comics fan and you've read the Swamp Thing comics, you know that there are times where he has wings. So I was very, very excited. Guardians 3 is wonderful. It deals with the fallout of Infinity War and Endgame quite well, while still being part of a kind of closed trilogy and being a standalone film as well. There's also a sequence, there's a hallway fight, which is maybe one of the best things that James Gunn has put on screen. One of the best fight sequences we've seen in any Marvel film. It's really, really good. I just don't have enough experience with it yet to rank it higher, but I love Guardians 3. Alrighty. Coming in at 5th place is Superman. I loved Superman. I really, really enjoyed Superman, seeing it in theaters. I saw it on a Sunday night in Melbourne, to a packed house. That doesn't happen in Australia very often. I don't know what it's like in America, but we don't get packed houses for films much anymore, and certainly not on a Sunday night. But opening weekend, Sunday night Superman, everyone was there. I was there with my friend Josh, and we had a blast. I've liked every iteration of Superman. My first Superman was Henry Cavill. I'd seen Superman Returns previously, but I didn't really remember it much. But Henry Cavill's Superman was my first Superman. He's the actor that made me like the character. Zack Snyder was the director that introduced me to the character in a way that I enjoyed it. I always found growing up Superman to be a bit of a boring character. I talked about this earlier this year. And it's because I didn't understand how cool he is as a character. He's not boring. His strengths don't make him boring. They make him interesting. But I needed that kind of thread line in, and that's what Man of Steel did for me. After watching and loving Man of Steel, I became a comics reader, and I read Superman comics. I saw different versions of him. So by the time we got to James Gunn's Superman, I knew what I wanted from a Superman film, and boy, did this deliver. I don't buy into the critiques of it. I don't think the CGI looks bad. I don't know what people are talking about there. I think the CGI looks fantastic. I don't buy into the critiques that there's too many jokes. It's meant to be lighthearted. It's meant to be a family film. Man of Steel is a wonderful movie. It's one of my favorite Superman films of all time. I think at the time of recording, before that film came out, Man of Steel was my number one Superman film. But I like that I can show my kid this film. You know, it's rated M, but at 5 years old, she can probably watch most of it. There are a couple of dark scenes with Lex Luthor, but for the most part, I think she could watch it. I can't show my kid Man of Steel, not for another at least 5 years, probably 10 years, which is fine. When she gets to see it, she'll see how amazing it is and how majestic and cinematic and beautiful it is. But until then, I like that we've got a very accessible Superman that everyone can watch. I thought the casting was great. I love Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner. I love Mr. Terrific. Hawkgirl is probably the only character that I felt was a little bit underdeveloped, and that seems to be a common critique. I will agree with that one. But it's not a Hawkgirl movie, you know? All you needed from her appearance in that film was to see that what her power set was, and more importantly, and I think most importantly, what her attitude towards justice was. And, you know, spoiler alert, because it's a relatively new film, she drops a guy to his death. That scene there is the most important piece of character development for her in that film, knowing that the line between her and Superman is clearly drawn. Metamorpho was fantastic. Lex Luthor was fantastic. The very brief look at Supergirl I really loved. It's colourful, it's fun, but it's got shades. It does get dark, of course, as well. It's a wonderful flick. So I really like Superman. I know I'm not going to convince anti-James Gunn fans of that. Like, their mind is made up. It doesn't matter what I say. They're not going to watch it. That's fine. But I do think you're missing out if you don't watch it. But that's totally fine. We're now at the halfway point. So Superman and Guardians 3 I've only seen once. I do think both of them would be ranked higher in a situation where I'd seen them more than once. But for now, I think it's only fair to keep them lower. Guardians 2, I'm confident putting in final place. Not because it's a bad film, I just think I like all of James Gunn's other films better. So coming in the middle, number 4 is James Gunn's first ever film, Slither. Slither is a fantastic film. It's really, really entertaining. Just like a lot of the directors I've been talking about in this series, it sets the tone of his career. If you watch Slither, you know exactly what kind of director and storyteller James Gunn is. It's this violent horror film with a lot of gore and gross out gags, but it's also very funny. Slither is an alien invasion film. A meteorite lands in a small town, and these slugs, these kind of intergalactic slugs, come out, and they possess the people of the town. Michael Rooker plays the villain. He plays the mayor. And over the course of the film, he gets more and more gross and augmented. And it's up to Nathan Fillion and his rookie cops to try and protect the town from this alien invasion. There's lots of splatter. There's lots of exploding bodies. There's lots of body horror. But it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very silly and funny. There's a romantic storyline, which I think works really well as well. It's a great debut flick. And if I think about all the filmmakers I've been talking about so far, like, one thing I think you'll agree, whether you like these filmmakers or not, is that their debut film speaks volumes to what kind of storyteller they are. Like, we know from watching The Witch who Robert Eggers is. We know from House of a Thousand Corpses who Rob Zombie is. We know from Slither who James Gunn is. We know from Shaun of the Dead who Edgar Wright is, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a fantastic flick, very, very entertaining, well worth your time. Once I've seen Superman and Guardians 3 a few more times, Slither will probably drop to the lower end of the scale, probably falling in at 6th place. Not because it's a bad film, but James Gunn has just evolved and grown so much since then and shown what he can do with a budget, what he can do with IP characters, what he can do with a franchise. And, you know, if your first film is your best film 10, 15 years later, then you're probably not growing as a filmmaker. Most directors, I think their first film should be lower on the list. We should be able to track that growth. And I think that's what's going to happen with James Gunn. Coming in at 3rd place is a film that I reference a lot when people say James Gunn doesn't have the chops or the experience to tell dark, grounded storylines. People do criticize this quite a bit. I've seen this online. When it comes to the greater DC universe, people say, yeah, sure, He did Superman. Yeah, he can do Peacemaker, but what about your dark characters? He couldn't, this isn't DC, but I saw someone say he could never do Spawn. I do think he could do Spawn. People say he couldn't do Batman. I do think he could do Batman. People say he can't do Constantine. I do think he could. And the reason I think he can do all of these things is he's very versatile, and whilst he tends to play in the light and the joy quite a bit, the stuff he's currently producing is quite dark. Peacemaker is very dark. The Suicide Squad is very dark. But nothing is darker than his film from 2010 called Super. Super is a movie I avoided for a long time because I wasn't a Rainn Wilson fan. I kind of found him a little bit annoying, but I didn't know much about him. And then I watched The Office, and I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. Rainn Wilson's genius. So it stars Rainn Wilson and Elliot Page. Rainn Wilson's wife is abducted by a drug dealer, and Rainn Wilson is bereft. He doesn't know what to do. He's a very Christian man, but he's not getting any guidance through religion until one day Jesus or God opens up his brain and plants the idea that he needs to become a superhero. This is a real movie. This is a real movie. And so he becomes a vigilante known as the Crimson Bolt, and he runs around town beating people up with a wrench. It's very graphic. Elliot Page, at the time, was Ellen Page, playing a comic book geek, and was a very, very big fangirl of the Crimson Bolt. And so she dressed up as his sidekick Bolty and would join him on his quest. This is Kick-Ass if Kick-Ass really was grounded. I know when Kick-Ass came out, people were like, oh my goodness, like this is so grounded, it's so serious, it's a really fresh take on superheroes. And then you watch Super and you're like, oh my goodness, like Kick-Ass is a cartoon, which is fine. I love Kick-Ass, and that just reminded me we need to do a Matthew Vaughn episode as well. But Super is, so much darker. It is not for everyone. It is not for everyone. There's a scene where Elliot Page forces himself onto Rainn Wilson, which is really uncomfortable. You never really see that in film. When it does come to scenes of non-consent, it tends to be men overpowering women, and instead it was the reverse, and it was just as shocking to watch and really, really uncomfortable. It's brutally violent. You've got Rainn Wilson smacking people over the head, splitting their skulls open with a wrench. And then there's a really shocking scene in the third act. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it and you want to watch it, but it comes out of nowhere. Things get very real very quickly. Kevin Bacon plays the villain, and he's excellent in it. It's a really well-made flick. It's a really bold vigilante tale, but it is not for the weak-hearted. It's definitely not for everyone. It is the one film on James Gunn's filmography that I would express extreme caution with. I think anything else he makes, you can give a go and probably have a bit of fun with, even the more violent stuff. But Super is definitely the tough one on the list. But I think it's one of his best. I think it's brilliant, and I think it's really underrated, underappreciated, and underseen. But for those who don't think James Gunn can do dark films, watch Super and get back to me. Tell me what you think after you've seen it. Bringing us into number 2, and honestly, number 2 and number 1 I think are fairly interchangeable. I think if you're paying attention, you'll know what the last 2 films are, and they're both excellent. I think number 2 only takes this place instead of number 1 because I think it's slightly less rewatchable and slightly less iconic than what's taken the number 1 spot. But honestly, it could go either way. Either way it could go. So coming in at number 2 is, of course, his 2021 DC debut, The Suicide Squad. I just rewatched The Suicide Squad the other day. I've been watching Peacemaker, and I was like, man, I want to go back to the origins of this Peacemaker character, because in The Suicide Squad, he's not a hero, he's a villain. And I guess he's like an anti-hero in his own TV show, but if you watch The Suicide Squad, he's so unlikable, and he commits an act that makes you hate him and want him to be killed. And then when he shows up in his own TV show, over the course of only a few episodes, you're like, oh my goodness, I actually love this character. What a magic trick that James Gunn's managed to pull off, and John Cena. But The Suicide Squad is kind of a sequel to the 2016 David Ayer one. It does take some liberties. It does do some soft rebooting. But Harley Quinn is the same Harley Quinn. Rick Flag is the same Rick Flag. They remember each other. They've worked together before. We're introduced to Bloodsport, played by Idris Elba, who kind of takes over the Deadshot role, which Will Smith was in. We get Polka Dot Man, played by David Dastmalchian, who's probably the best character in the film. We get Ratcatcher 2, played by Daniela Melifor. We get King Shark, voiced by Sylvester Stallone, who's a really fun character. And then we get a whole, spoiler alert for a 5-year-old film, fake-out team, who you think is going to be your Suicide Squad, but instead they all get massacred in the first 10 minutes, which is a stroke of genius. It really ups the stakes of the film, and it delivers on a promise that the first film didn't. The first film, you were told that everyone's expendable, but then only one character really died, so they weren't as expendable as you thought they were. This one takes out a bunch of people, and yes, they're lesser-known characters, but they're characters that Warner Brothers and DC at the time probably weren't going to utilize anyway. I think the only character that I was really disappointed that got killed was Captain Boomerang, because I really liked Jai Courtney in the Captain Boomerang role. I actually liked him in the first Suicide Squad. I liked him in the Suicide Squad, and I really want to see him come back. I do hope in this new version of the DC universe, if we do keep a few more castings from the previous iteration, I do hope we get Jai Courtney back. I think he's great in that role, and I think he's really underutilized. I think there's a version of a Flash film or a Rogues film where we get to see him do a little bit more. This one is insane. John Cena, as I mentioned, Peacemaker. We also have Peter Capaldi, wonderful Scottish thespian Peter Capaldi as the Thinker. And basically the Suicide Squad is sent into the Isle of Corto Maltese. If you've read the DC comics, you'll know that Corto Maltese is a very important region. It shows up in The Dark Knight Returns. It's shown up in a bunch of storylines. And it's a war-torn country. And the Suicide Squad is sent in there because they need to retrieve some information from a prison or like a lab called Jotunheim. And basically Corto Maltese was run by this royal family, and they were liberated recently, and the new regime is not friendly to America. So the Suicide Squad have to go in and get these plans and protect American interests, basically. It's very violent, very, very violent and gory. There's a great sequence in the third act where King Shark rips a man in two, and it's really beautiful in a twisted way. It's really emotionally driven. The heart of this film is Polka Dot Man and Ratcatcher 2. They've got some really lovely moments on either end of the scale. Polka Dot Man's severely depressed and had a very traumatic upbringing and is now just hoping to die, which is why he's a member of the Suicide Squad. Whereas Ratcatcher 2 had a really lovely upbringing but lost her father and is now trying to make him proud and make a name for herself and trying to move on. The heavy hitters are all fantastic. John Cena is very funny. I'd never really seen John Cena in much before except for Blockers. I really loved him in Blockers, but I do think Peacemaker is a role that he was born to play. Idris Elba is fantastic as Bloodsport. Even if he doesn't have too much to do, he is kind of your generic lead bad guy. Joel Kinnaman is incredible as Rick Flag. I liked him in the 2016 one. I think he has a lot more to do in this one. He's a lot more empathy, and of course Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn is fantastic. She's a lot of fun as well. I don't want to spoil it. If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out. It's a great flick. It represents, I think, the direction that James Gunn wanted the DC universe to go. At this point, he hadn't got the job as studio head yet, but you can tell the kind of stories he wanted to tell and what he wanted to do with those characters. And we're starting to see that in the universe he's building now. So I do hope we get some of these characters back. Peacemaker survived the old regime and is back. Harley, I'm not sure. Apparently in season 2 of Peacemaker, it's currently airing at the moment. By the time this drops, it's probably finished. There's meant to be some big cameos and surprises. I wouldn't be surprised if Harley showed up. I wouldn't be surprised if Boomerang maybe showed up, or Bloodsport. I think there's a couple of Suicide Squad members we're probably going to get back. But it's really good. Really great action film. The third act is incredible. I will spoil this because, oh my god, it's been out for 5 years. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing? But the villain is Starro the Conqueror, which is the first villain the Justice League ever fought in the comics. He's a giant psychic starfish. And it's really fun and also really sad. The film ends on a bit of a down note, and you actually feel sorry for this giant starfish kaiju who's crushing everyone to death. It's a great flick. It's really fun. And it proves that James Gunn can tell that quirky Band of Misfits style story we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy, but infuse it with more adult humor and themes so it can appeal to a more mature audience as well. And when I saw that film, I really hoped we'd see more of James Gunn doing DC stuff, which of course we're seeing now. And this brings me to my final film in the ranking. You should have figured out by now. When I was writing this list, I didn't think would be my number one. I felt like that was too obvious an answer. But the flick is pretty much perfect. So, of course, at number one, we have to go with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Guardians of the Galaxy, at the time, was an unknown property. It had been in the comics for decades, but outside of comic book readers, the mainstream didn't really know about it. This was the first big risk that Marvel took. Guardians of the Galaxy showed up towards the end of Phase 2. We had a Thor sequel, which was received with mixed reviews. We had an Iron Man sequel, which was received with mixed reviews. We had a Captain America sequel, which is still considered one of, if not the best film in the entire cinematic universe. And we were heading towards Age of Ultron and Ant-Man. And Ant-Man might have been a bit of a risk, but we'd seen a lot of men in powered suits at this point, so I think we were all feeling pretty confident with Ant-Man. But Guardians of the Galaxy, no one knew. No one was familiar with this franchise. James Gunn was relatively unknown to general audiences. As I mentioned, I was a fan. I'd known his previous work, but this was going to be his first mainstream film, and it was this space opera. And this film came out before Star Wars was bought by Disney. Our first Star Wars film from Disney was The Force Awakens, and we hadn't had a Star Wars film in almost 10 years. And I remember seeing the trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy, that pop music, you know, they used Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede and all these space fights. And I was like, wow, like someone's doing a Star Wars film without calling it Star Wars. And after watching Guardians for the first time, and I still remember seeing it in theaters, I was blown away. I was like, yep, in a world where we're not getting any Star Wars films, this will do very nicely. And then, of course, Force Awakens came out, and we had a bit of fun with that one. Guardians of the Galaxy is a band of misfits. It's 5 people, I think it's 5, who are brought together out of necessity. They're not friends. They're all criminals in different ways, and they unite over a common goal. So Peter Quill, Star-Lord, played by Chris Pratt. It was the first time the world was really introduced to him. He had been doing work on Parks and Rec. He'd done Zero Dark 30, and I think he'd also done The Hurt Locker. But he wasn't a household name. This was kind of his big breakout moment, and he crushed it. You know, in the first 10 minutes of the film, he's dancing around on an alien planet to that Redbone song, and we fell in love with him. You got Zoe Saldana as Gamora, who's fantastic, the most deadly woman in the Marvel Universe. Karen Gillan as Nebula, and she had previously been in Doctor Who, and the big thing about this film was she shaved her head for it, and people were losing their minds. Bradley Cooper is the voice of Rocket Raccoon, Vin Diesel the voice of Groot, and John C. Reilly as one of the members of the Nova Corps, Glenn Close as Nova Prime, Lee Pace as Ronan. We had got our first introduction to Josh Brolin as Thanos. It's a crazy film. It's an epic film. And it's kind of this weird heist film where they kind of get possession of the Power Stone, one of the Infinity Stones, which we are introduced to the concept of Infinity Stones at this point, because now we're heading towards Infinity War. It's still 4 years before Infinity War would show up in theaters, but we're building towards that. We have Ultron coming, and then we know Thanos is coming after that at some point. We have this wonderful sequence where they get locked in this prison ship, and they have to turn on the zero gravity to escape. It's incredible. There's the amazing fight between Ronan's, the Kree, and the Nova Corps, and the Nova Corps fly their star-shaped ships, and they create this net. It's just incredible, man. Like, the one critique the film had, and I understand it, is that the final fight was a little bit silly. You know, it's a dance-off between Peter Quill and Lee Pace as Ronan, but it's just a distraction so they can use the Power Stone against him. I don't care. I don't care if it's dumb. It fits the tone of the film, and it's less about the dance-off and more about distracting him so they can unleash cosmic power against one of their villains. It's this wonderful dysfunctional family of a film. We'd never seen anything like it before, and I think it stands the test of time. I still think it's one of the best things Marvel has ever put out. I'd put it at the same level as Iron Man, the original one. I'd put it at the same level as Winter Soldier. I'd put it up there with Infinity War and Endgame. It's an incredible film. It is the jewel in the crown of James Gunn's filmography, but he has a very stellar record. There is not a single film on this list that I don't like. I love all of them. I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. I think he's very creative and very has a lot of ingenuity, and I can't wait to see what he does next. I don't have to wait too long because Peacemaker is still on TV as of right now, and in 2 years' time we're getting Man of Tomorrow. So before we wrap up for the episode, thank you again for listening. In reverse order from 7 to 1. In 7th place, I've got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. In 6th place, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In 5th place, Superman. In 4th place, Slither. In 3rd place, Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad is number 2. And number 1 is Guardians of the Galaxy. It's an incredible work. I'd like to see James Gunn do more original content. However, given his current job, I don't think that's going to be likely for the next 10 or 15 years. I think he's going to be pretty heavily involved in DC, maybe even longer. Like Kevin Feige is closing in on 20 years. And James Gunn, I think, is a little bit younger than Kevin Feige, or around the same age as Kevin Feige. So we're probably going to see James Gunn in DC world for a little while longer. But I don't think he minds. I think the legacy of the guy who is hopefully saving the DC universe is certainly not a bad one to have. But if he gets time, I would love to see some of his other original stuff. He produced a movie called Brightburn a few years back, which was really wonderful. He's definitely got some other interesting stuff going on. But in the meantime, the 7 films he's made are more than enough. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully you all dug it. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Sound off in the comments. Thank you for supporting the show while I'm on hiatus. I'll have another director focus next week. And in the meantime, as we say on this podcast every week, guys, I was a teenage film snob, but I'm trying to be better. I'll see you next week.